2887 Inner Circle. They spent the day resting. Nefis meditated with her eyes closed, her face pale. Seeing her like this, Sunny was reminded of their times on the Forgotten Shore, the early days spent in the Crimson Labyrinth, searching for the city from Cassie's vision. Nefis used to meditate often back then, as well, learning how to cope with the pain of her flaw. She was not in pain at the moment, but being defeated and losing most of her domain must have hurt just as much, if not more. But he knew that she would be, if not all right, then at least the same. That was Nefis. After all, she did not know how to stop. No matter how hurt she got, she continued to push forward with the same blind determination, utterly devoted to her seemingly unreasonable goal. If he asked, she would say that it was just pain. She had grown used to pain even before they met, and that was why no amount of anguish could faze her. That said, her stubbornness did not mean that she was inflexible. On the contrary, Nefis could adapt to almost anything, becoming whatever she needed to become in order to overcome the obstacles facing her. At the moment, that meant that their present strategy had to change. Sunny fought on the ground, surrounded by his shades and protected by his shadows. As of late, there was also Azarax and his deathless army to support the Shadow Legion in case an especially tough enemy revealed itself. Nefis was alone in the sky, though. Dodging the arrows and javelins of the cursed prisoners of Ariel's hell was already difficult enough, but there were also beings capable of flight among the deathless. It did not really make sense, since nothing supported the weight of their skeletal bodies in the air, and yet it was true. With her power severely diminished, Nefis could not stay alone in the sky anymore. So, they decided that from tonight forward, her role was going to change. Instead of attacking the deathless from above to make the passage of the Shadow Legion easier, she was going to be among the shades on the ground tonight. Nef's role would be to heal the shades as they were being damaged, which would allow the Shadow Legion to move much faster and face far greater threats. And if her help was needed, she would always be able to aim the blessing at their enemies and join the fight. Which meant that Sunny would be the tip of the spear today. He was glad to be, but the tactics he used would need to be shifted to a more aggressive approach. Despite his irritating personality, Azarax is quite useful. It was not just that the ancient tyrant was powerful or that his thralls were strong. The most beneficial thing about him was that his deathless warriors could move ahead of the Shadow Legion, serving as a robust meat shield. Well, perhaps a bone shield, in this case. The point was that their presence on the battlefield diminished the rate of attrition among Sunny's shades and allowed the Shadow Legion to be more effective. What do you think we will find there? Nef's voice distracted Sunny from his thoughts. At some point, she had opened her eyes and looked at the distant silhouette of the tomb of Ariel. Her voice sounded even, but there was a dark undertone to it. Sunny hesitated. Eventually, he shrugged. There is no way to tell. The real Great River was bound to be entirely different from the one they had encountered in the nightmare. That was because there would not have been a twilight in the true tomb of Ariel. Darren's people had only entered the seed of nightmare, after all, not the actual pyramid. It was only the Serpent King himself and a small number of his champions who had. So, there would be no city of the outsiders on the Great River. There would be no army to lay siege to Verge, even if it had ultimately failed. This absence would affect the cities of the river people, as well, changing everything Sunny and Nefis knew about their civilization. However, there would be no plagues, either. Because the members of the cohort, too, had only entered the nightmare version of the Tomb of Ariel, not the real thing. The forces of the defilement would not have been led on a terrifying conquest of the Great River by the 6 heralds of the estuary, and so, the cities of the river people could still be intact. Sunny did not believe that they were, though. He sighed. But I am certain that it will be bad. His opinion was based on one simple fact. It was that he had encountered many nightmare creatures from the Tomb of Ariel during the Chain of Nightmares. The fact that they had been able to escape the dream realm in great numbers hinted at the fact that the civilization of the river people had fallen, after all, and that there was nothing but corruption in the Great Pyramid anymore. And there was something else, as well. It was the vile thieving bird. If it had really made a nest at the heart of the Tomb of Ariel after escaping the nightmare and returning to life once more, then there was no telling how its presence affected the Great River. That loathsome bird was a unique existence that had been hated both by the gods and by the void beings, which meant that it did not really belong to either side. That made it highly unpredictable. From what Sunny knew, the vile thieving bird was only interested in shiny things and anything that had to do with Weaver, so there was no telling what it would do. There was a high chance that it had left the Tomb of Ariel already, even if Sunny believed that it hadn't. There was also a chance that it simply waited in the estuary. Alternatively, it could have already destroyed Virgin Eden, the first seeker. It could have stolen the eyes of every human in fallen grace or weave. It could have even stolen all 7 suns from the skies above the great river, just to add them to its collection of shiny things. So, Sunny did not know. Nefis smiled faintly. Worse than this, he chuckled. Listen, I might be a bit oblivious at times, but even I am not foolish enough to say something like no, things just can't get any worse aloud. Things can definitely get way worse. He looked up. Do you hear that, universe? I've learned. The sun was already setting, so Azarax emerged from the deep shadows at the base of the rock formation and put his fearsome axe on his shoulder. Deep in the shining carapace of his glass armor, the black skeleton seemed to be absorbing the scarlet radiance of the sunset. Prepare yourselves, waifs. The night is coming. Sunny sighed and rose to his feet. Nefis followed his example, her simple white tunic fluttering in the rising wind. All around them, the sand rippled. The deathless warriors subjugated by Azarax rose from beneath the dunes, forming a crescent formation in front of the 3 supremes. Then, an army of shades rose from Sunny's shadows to stand behind them. The wolf and his pack, the obsidian wasps, the great beasts of Godgrave and the Asuras of Condemnation, the immortals of the Eternal City, and more. Saint and Slayer moved forward to lead them. Serpent slithered across the dunes like an onyx river, his chilling hiss reverberating under the dark sky. Sunny inhaled deeply, feeling his strength grow as deep shadows shrouded the world. He divided himself into 7 avatars and reached into the shadows, preparing to encase each in a fearsome shell. Azarax was already walking forward to stand at the forefront of the joined formation of the Deathless and the Shades. Tonight is going to be different. Tonight, we will taste the true meaning of dread, the true horror of Ariel's hell. His grin seemed to grow wider and more vicious. That is because we are close to the inner expanse of the desert. Here, only the most elite armies of the Demon Legion and the Divine Host clashed for the right to rule hell. So, tonight, we will probably face the worst fiends who dwell in this godforsaken land, the Blessed Land. Supreme, sacred, have you ever faced sacred beings in battle, Shadow? Sunny shook his head. No, Azarax scoffed. Unsurprising, you wouldn't know the dread and horror of earning a deity's wrath. Sunny interrupted him in a calm tone. I did kill a few cursed beings, though. Including a cursed tyrant. No, wait. 2 cursed tyrants. One was alive, while the other was already dead. But I still killed both. Azarax stared at him silently for a few moments, then turned his skull to Nefis. She shrugged. I did fight a few cursed ones, but I only ever killed one. A demon. She paused for a moment, and then added in a calm tone. What about you? The ancient tyrant remained silent for a while. Eventually, he just looked away and stared at the desert. Well, anyway, you're out of luck. Because if we do encounter one of the sacred beasts of the High Commanders tonight. The darkness nestling in his eyes seemed to grow deeper. You'll get a chance to face a sacred being who cannot be killed. Let's see how strong you are then. Sunny, all 7 of his incarnations, looked at Azarax at the same time. He lingered for a moment and then sighed. If we do encounter something like that, it won't matter how strong we are. He smiled. What will matter is how swift we can run. And we can both run faster than you, so, who is really out of luck here, huh? With that, he commanded the Shadow Legion to march forward. Another night in hell had begun. 2888 other side of the coin. The Deathless were already rising from beneath the dunes, ready to descend upon those who had invaded Ariel's hell in all their unending fury. Sunny and Azarax took their places at the head of the battle formation, while Nefis remained at the back, standing among the shades like a flash of pure white flame in the sea of darkness. Just before the battle began, Sunny glanced at the distant, but not as distant as before, silhouette of the tomb of Ariel. At that moment, he thought he heard something. An echo of a distant, indiscernible whisper that crawled into his ears and disappeared, as if it had burrowed into his brain. He stumbled slightly. Azarax gave him a contemptuous glance. What, Shadow, are you afraid? Sunny remained motionless for a moment, then shook his head. The incarnation who was closest to Azarax did, at least. No, I thought I heard something. Didn't you hear it, too? The black skull of the ancient tyrant just stared at him with its empty eye sockets, then turned away with a snarl. Get your head into the game. Sunny smiled darkly. What the hell was that? Of course, he knew what it was even while asking the question. It was the Call of Nightmare. The Great Pyramid was built from numerous enormous blocks of black stone, and each of those blocks was a seed of nightmare, just like the one that had been knocked free and sent flying by some titanic blow eons ago, ending up far away in the desert. The block of stone Sunny and his cohort had used to enter the nightmare about the last days of the river people. All seeds emanated the call, and all awakened were susceptible to the call. In fact, the more powerful you were, the more maddening the call of nightmare became, drawing you forth to challenge the seed. Actually, Sunny had never known if the call of nightmare was simply something innate to the seeds or if it was a function of the spell meant to push Awaken to grow stronger. Now that he was not a carrier of the spell but still suffered from the maddening melody of the call, though, he knew that it was the former. Which was an interesting philosophical question to ponder, if one had free time. Why were all Awaken drawn to the nightmare seeds? After all, it was only the carriers of the nightmare spell who could destroy them by challenging the nightmares. For everyone else, touching a seed simply meant surrendering themselves to corruption. Perhaps that was why the seeds emanated the call. Maybe they were meant to lure living beings into becoming twisted by corruption, like enormous flytraps emanating a sweet scent. Or maybe it was the reverse side of what the puppeteer had once told Sunny. According to the giant moth, all nightmare creatures were drawn to the flame because of a maddening contradiction within them. They longed for the flame and wanted to either possess or destroy it, because only then would they know peace. Perhaps the awakened were drawn to the void for the same reason, as well. And the call they heard was simply an expression of that innate, primordial longing. That was the philosophical question. Sunny, however, did not have the luxury of free time to ponder it. Instead, he had to contemplate a far more practical matter. With so many seeds of nightmare constituting the tomb of Ariel, millions of them, quite likely, just how deafening the call of nightmare would become by the time Sunny and Nephis reached it. Would they even be able to withstand it without going mad? I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Sunny shook his head, as if trying to shake the whisper out of his ear. I have 7 heads, and they are all in the game. Worry about your own head, Fossil. Azarax laughed. I've never beheaded someone 7 times. I have something to look forward to now, thank you, Shadow. In front of them, the endless horde of Deathless was already advancing to descend upon the invading army like a flood. Sunny exhaled slowly and sent all 7 of his avatars forward. One step at a time. The battle washed over him, drowning out all unnecessary thoughts. Azarax had been right. Tonight, the oppressive force of the Deathless felt much heavier. Sunny and Nephis had already been fighting in the Nightmare Desert for weeks. Not a single night had been easy, and their fatigue accumulated. Their enemies, on the contrary, only kept growing stronger and stronger the deeper into Ariel's hell they went. The Deathless were, naturally, a terrifying foe to face. After all, it was in their name. Fighting creatures who could not be killed was something that only a madman would do, and yet Sunny and Nephis did just that, night after night. The undead warriors couldn't be destroyed, but they could be rendered harmless. To achieve that, each had to be dismantled bone by bone, and even then, black bones tended to assemble back together after some time. So, they had to crush the bones into dust, even if each of those bones was as tough and durable as a steel weapon of a high rank would have been. Added to that was the chilling skill and cunning of the Deathless warriors, as well as their eerie ability to cooperate with each other and instinctual understanding of military tactics. The most deadly thing about the Deathless, however, was their will. To most people, the undead prisoners of Ariel's hell and Sunny's shades would seem quite similar. But actually, they were the opposite of each other. The shades were shadows cleansed of their mortal vessels and their sense of self, while the Deathless were mortal vessels who had been denied their shadows, and therefore their deaths. As a result, they were just as void of personhood, but at the same time far more aware of their own selves, and therefore in possession of a quiet but powerful will. More than that, their will was vast like an ocean. Sunny had already encountered that phenomenon while fighting the Black Millipede tribe. Back then, none of the Millipedes had possessed a will powerful enough to threaten him, not even the queens, since he outclassed them. However, there were simply too many nightmare creatures in the great swarm of their ghastly tribe. Their weak wills fused together, forming a vast and alarming force that could crush and wash away anything, least of all a lone enemy. Sunny had withstood the harrowing immensity of the Black Millipedes' collective will, the spirit of their species, because he was a supreme titan, and because he was cunning and cautious, eroding it away bit by bit before finally forcing a decisive battle. However, the Deathless were far more powerful than the Black Millipedes had been, and he was pressed for time on top of that. So, even with 3 sovereigns, Sunny, Nephis, and Azarax, Fighting side by side and supported by 3 supreme shadows, waging a war on the Deathless was a daunting affair. They had made it this far into the desert due to their strength, determination, and skill, but most of all, due to their ability to adapt. Their ability to learn. 2889 Ancient Grudges. The Deathless were growing stronger the deeper into Ariel's hell they went, yes, but Sunny and Nephis were learning how to fight them better, as well. There were the mundane lessons of how to dismantle the undead warriors faster and more effectively. There were the broader lessons of developing better strategies and implementing better tactics, as well. Most importantly, Sunny and Nephis were learning about the nature of the Deathless, and therefore about their weaknesses. One of those weaknesses, for example, was the tenuous grasp the undead warriors had on their aspects and powers. Most Deathless had either lost them entirely or could only use them on a shallow level, as if using muscle memory to do something that they did not understand or remember anymore. As a result, fighting the undead horrors was an exhausting, but mostly straightforward affair. It was combat in the purest of forms, a clash that relied solely on physical prowess and martial skill, even if the physical power involved in that clash was obliterating and terrifying enough to destroy lesser realms and reshape the very landscape of hell. It was a Phu Sakal clash shaped by the underlying battle of warring wills, of course. Even then, Sunny and Nephis had found ways to overcome the tyrannical vastness of the enemy's will. The secret to doing so lay in the fact that it was not just 2 wills that clashed with each other, their will against the will of the Deathless. Instead, it was actually 3 wills struggling to subjugate one another. That was because the Deathless were not a monolithic force. Even if they were united in their determination to obliterate the invaders, the undead warriors who had once belonged to the demonic legion were still opposed to the undead warriors who had once belonged to the divine host, and vice versa. Even consumed by the curse of Shadow God, the 2 great armies still struggled against each other. Their resentment ran so deep that even after forgetting themselves, the Deathless still carried an overwhelming hostility toward the enemy. The thousands of years that had passed since the Doom War did not diminish their animosity toward each other one bit. If anything, it only made that animosity far greater. The Deathless seemed to forget their strife when faced with a new enemy, but that was only an illusion. In truth, both sides still harbored a deep resentment for the other army, even while they were trying to eradicate the invaders. That division was not noticeable in their movements and seamless tactics, but betrayed itself in the turbulent expanse of their will. In other words, there were powerful undercurrents in the vast ocean of crushing will the Deathless wielded, and those undercurrents clashed and collided with each other, creating a state of chaos and discord. If one knew how to make use of that discord, how to slip through the cracks in the insurmountable mountain of the enemy's will, they could overpower it with far less effort than would have been needed to summit the mountain through brute force. So, that was how Sunny and Nephis managed to make it halfway to the tomb of Ariel despite facing a seemingly endless horde of ancient, undying, immensely powerful foes. Tonight, however, it all felt different. The power of the Deathless they faced had taken a qualitative leap. The billowing ocean of murderous will they possessed felt deeper than ever before. Their presence, too, felt different from before. It was colder, crueler, and far more focused. Let's think positively. The 7 incarnations of Sunny were the vanguard of the battle formation, serving to break the momentum of the advancing Deathless and soften them up for the marching army behind him. He moved like water, being elusive at times and exploding with crushing power at others. His mind had entered the state of battle clarity and turned into a diamond under the pressure of controlling 7 supreme bodies in a ferocious, deadly battle. Every second, he unleashed a hurricane of attacks and withstood a storm of blows, breaking and weakening the Deathless while attempting to remain whole. His shells were damaged and torn, but at a slower rate than his ability to repair them. So, he could continue to fight. Some distance ahead, Azarax was rampaging among the undead warriors. He had grown to tower over the dunes, clashing with the most powerful of the enemies as the desert quaked and groaned around them. Unlike Sunny, there was nothing elusive or flowing about how the ancient tyrant fought. His battle style was all about dominance and oppression, explosive force and relentless aggression, which was not to say that it was brutish or lacked sophistication. On the contrary, Azarax channeled his merciless, cruel fury in a chillingly calculated manner. As Sunny watched, he lunged forward to clash with a towering black skeleton clad in the rusty remains of bronze armor. The ancient tyrant created a false opening by lowering his enormous axe, then ducked under the enemy's rusty greatsword. At the same time, he hooked his opponent's leg with the beard of the axe and pulled it back, sending the black skeleton falling to the ground in a cloud of white sand. In the blink of an eye, Azarax was upon his fallen enemy, bringing his foot down on the undead warrior's chest. He pressed the deathless champion into the sand and brought his axe down on his skull. As a shockwave rolled from the point of impact, and the skull of his adversary cracked, however, it did not shatter. Azarax had left it in one piece on purpose. Because a second later, when the ancient tyrant removed his foot from the enemy's ribcage and dashed forward to meet the next opponent, the deathless warrior slowly rose from the ground and joined the formation of the undead warriors who followed the deathless sovereign's commands. Sunny was trying to keep up. How do we think positively? Well, let's think about it as training. Training to finally kill Uriz, that vile bastard. Unlike Azarax, who could subjugate the deathless by defeating them, Sunny could only dismantle them completely, or at least severely damage them and leave the rest to his soldiers. So, every clash took him much longer. But hey, there's 7 of me. So who's to say which one of us is accomplishing more? While Sunny and Azarax fought in the front, their armies followed behind, soaking the brunt of the undead horde's assault. The deathless following Azarax were in the first row of the formation, assembled loosely, while the soldiers of the Shadow Legion were positioned behind them. The skeletal warriors were the first line of defense, and the shades were the sharp blades that lashed out from behind them to bring the enemies down. Well, most of them, at least. The wolf was not someone who respected or had a need for a defensive formation, so it ravaged the enemies wherever there was an opening, crushing their black bones between his mighty teeth. From a distance, the battle formation of the invading army looked odd, almost comical, even. It was as if an army of living beings divided itself in two, with the blackened skeletons of the soldiers moving forward while their inky souls fell back. The enemy was much stronger tonight than it had been before. But the speed with which the invading army advanced was not at all slower. 2,890 proper healer. The speed of their advance did not diminish. That was because today, Sunny employed a much more aggressive approach. His shades were not cautious anymore, and neither were they trying to preserve themselves at all. Instead, they intentionally ignored the blows that rained down upon them in order to deliver the adversary as much harm as possible, as quickly as possible. This complete lack of self-preservation went against most underlying rules of combat and gave them a fearsome advantage against the deathless. Of course, it came at a cost. The price of this speed was destruction. And yet, they were not being destroyed. Once a shade received enough damage, the formation of the Shadow Legion would instantly shift, allowing it to fall back and for another shade to take its place. The wounded one, meanwhile, would reach the rear of the formation, where Nefis moved among the shades waiting for their turn to advance. She would lay her radiant hands on the torn and tattered surface of the returning shade and heal it, allowing the silent warrior to rotate back to the line of battle contact soon. In that way, the formation of the Shadow Legion continued to revolve, with fresh and nearly uninjured shades constantly attacking the adversary. Look at me, playing the general. Who could have thought that he would command an entire army one day, back when he was crawling through the mud with the rest of the grunts in Antarctica? Sunny was glad to see his latest strategy work. However, he knew that it was unlikely to last long. That was because while Nefis healed the shades, she wasn't bringing fire and destruction upon the deathless from the sky. Their focus wasn't split, and the undead warriors further behind the contact line were not being torn apart and damaged by her flames. The pressure was going to mount the longer the battle continued, and his best hope was that the increased power of the Shadow Legion would balance out the absence of Nef's incinerating flames. But if it did not, that was all right, as well. After all, Nefis could always join the battle again. With the longing domain in shambles, her power was diminished, not gone. She was still a supreme titan and a wielder of a divine aspect, she was still a descendant of Sun God. So even in this weakened state, she was a terror to behold. It was just that they needed to find a way to use her powers in the most effective and efficient way. Nefis had almost always fought on the front line, not the most common role for a healer, but also not something that was unheard of. Tonight, they were going to see if she could do just as much damage, or perhaps even more of it, by staying back. She was in a unique position to do so, after all. Usually, those who would be fighting on the front line in her place were people, and unlike her, people could not heal their own wounds. So, they died. Neither the deathless thralls of Azarax nor Sunny's shades could die, though. Therefore, Nef could allow herself to stay back without paying a bloody price for it. So far, it was working really well. It was working splendidly, even, so much so that Sunny could not help but wonder just how much more fearsome the Shadow Legion would have been if he were still bonded to Nefis, and could therefore share in the power of her soul flames. Perhaps he would find out, one day soon. Their small army advanced forward in a devastating storm of violence. Just like during every previous night, the Nightmare Desert was being ravaged by that storm, silently enduring the deafening mayhem of the battle and the inconceivable fury of forces unleashed by each clash. Saint fought on the left flank of the battle formation, while Slayer fought on the right. The former was just as methodical and indomitable as always, while the latter was just as malevolent and vicious. No, if anything, Slayer had become even more ruthless than usual. She had come around a lot ever since Sunny first became her master, but during these weeks in the Nightmare Desert, she slowly returned to her former feral self. Perhaps the hell of Ariel reminded her of her days in the Shadow Realm. One was a desolate wasteland of obsidian dunes, while the other was an endless desert of white sand. One was populated by the shadows of the dead, while the other was populated by undying skeletons. It wasn't difficult to imagine that Slayer felt right at home here in Hell. The difference, of course, was that now she was of a higher rank and had regained her aspect. So, instead of stalking and hunting her prey, Slayer was simply tearing it apart. When needed, she used her bow and arrows. Most of the time, though, she fought by assuming the shapes of the beasts she had once slain, and there seemed to be a myriad of forms she could take, choosing the most lethal one depending on the situation she was in and the enemies she faced. Sunny, who was notoriously bad at recognizing extinct animals, saw all kinds of harrowing beasts in these last few weeks. Most of them powerful, mythical creatures of the distant past, of course, but still. He was almost glad to have been born in the time when most of the planet was a lifeless desert. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that humans had survived when all these strange, terrifying creatures were just walking around as if it was no big deal. Take a mongoose, for example. Hey, Shadow. Azarax had just finished stomping a skeletal deathless beast into dust after shattering its skull with his axe, and was now looking ahead with a grim expression. I think we are about to feel some agony. Sunny did not need to be warned, because he had felt it himself. Out there in front of them, the dunes were moving as something rose from beneath them, sending rivers of sand flowing down from its enormous form. But that was not what made him tense. Instead, it was the fact that the world itself was changing. The currents of will were twisting, as if a vast whirlpool was forming in its boundless, oppressive ocean. You just had to open your jaws and say it, didn't you? Sunny's voice was full of resentment. The ancient tyrant's warning was coming true. It seemed that they had stumbled upon a sacred foe, after all.